Larry. Hello, and welcome to this fabulous Flag Day event. You know, it always energizes me whenever I'm in the presence of patriots, and just by being here, you've proven to me that you are patriots. As Andrew said, I'm Larry Wiebe, and I'm the co-founder of an organization called Citizens First. Citizens First is a non-profit organization we established a few months ago, and it's dedicated to educating citizens about their government and organizing a constitutional convention for the purpose of applying some amendments to that Constitution. Now, before that frightens you, let me first assure you that my co-founder and I consider the Constitution the closest thing to a sacred document written in this country. We consider it written by the greatest collection of geniuses that have probably ever come together. All right? Okay. Sorry. So anyway, I want to make sure that the notion of us wanting to amend the Constitution doesn't scare you off. We're not radicals. We are very like-minded individuals who want to move this country forward. So you might say, if we've got so much respect for the Constitution, why do we want to amend it? Well, we're motivated the same reason you are. We are not happy with the direction that the country is heading. And as we looked at what it takes to turn it around, we believe just a few amendments could go a long way to turn the country back to its foundation and its initial principles. Just by a show of hands, for example, let me know who in this organization or in this crowd today is happy with their Congress. Who's happy? Not many hands. In fact, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to throw a lot of statistics out at you here in just a few seconds. The last Congress, at one point, had an approval rating of just 13%. That was half of President Bush's approval rating. However, 90% of congressmen continue to get reelected, and that is not a new statistic. For the last 40 years, the weighted average actually is 88% of members of Congress have been reelected year after year for the past 40 years. So I ask you, how are you going to turn the country around when you continue to get the same leadership over and over again? Then you have to ask yourself, if approval ratings are so low, why do they continue to get reelected? Well, the reason they do is because the barriers to run for office are just simply too high. An average Senate race now in this country costs $8.6 million. An average House race costs $1.3 million. And if you're a challenger, you have to spend twice that to expect to win. And yes, the big spender usually does win. In fact, the biggest spender wins 85% of the time. So to a significant extent, the parties, as fundraising mechanisms and special interests, are buying the elections. Citizens' first answer to that is we need an amendment that will impose 12-year term limits on Congress. Let's talk a little bit about the presidency now. How many of you, in one of the recent elections, doesn't have to be the last one, voted against a candidate instead of for a candidate? I'm probably worse than most in this crowd. I have voted against a candidate the last 4 consecutive elections. And every time I do, I ask myself, how can this be? As some of the other speakers have said, we are the greatest nation on earth. We've got 300 million people in this country, and we have some of the best leadership the world has to offer. Yet we keep getting choices that cause folks like us to want to vote against somebody instead of for somebody. The process is broken. It's not for lack of leadership. It's for lack of getting options out in front of voters. The other thing that I'm sure a number of you, and this is, again, our organization, like the Hoosiers organization here, we are nonpartisan, we're not conservative, we're not liberal, we're American. And in the last primary election, if you were choosing to vote Republican, you were disenfranchised. I was disenfranchised because by the time our primary was held, John McCain, love him or not, already had the nomination. And as an American citizen, I was highly irritated that I didn't get a chance to vote for this. Iowa voters, and I had lived in Iowa for 5 years, so nothing against Iowans, but Iowa voters have considerably more impact on the selection of our president than you do. New Hampshire voters right behind. So as Citizens First, we just believe that's another change that has to happen. So we actually have two amendment proposals. One is a national primary election day. We have a general election day that way, why not a primary? The other thing that we propose, and this may be a little more controversial, because believe me, like the rest of you, I know I pay plenty of taxes and I don't need to pay more. But when you look at the congressional races, where 85% of the time, the big spender wins. And I don't know the statistic, it's probably not that different in the presidential contests. We need to take the influence of special interest and specifically the money out of the equation. What we need is the best leadership, not who can raise the most money. So our third amendment proposal is to have all the national offices taxpayer funded. That way they get a limited amount of resources. One of the first tests of leadership is how well you can do with a limited amount of resources. That way candidates would be forced to win the nomination, forced to win the election based on their ideas and their qualifications. And that, frankly, is what we all deserve as citizens of this country.
Amen.
Now let me talk a little bit about Article 5. Article 5 is the portion of the Constitution that speaks to how the Constitution can be amended. And it provides two methods. The first method is an act of Congress, starts with an act of Congress, gets passed among the states for ratification, and when 3/4 of the states ratify that act of Congress, it becomes an amendment. It's the only process that's ever been used for all of the amendments that we have. The second process that hasn't been used is a convention, constitutional convention. A constitutional convention, the amendments are ratified the same way. Any proposed amendment that would come out of a convention would have to be passed by 3/4 of the state legislators. What's different is that this is the one mechanism that citizens can use to pass amendments that congressmen wouldn't like, that the president wouldn't like, that the Supreme Court wouldn't like, because it is completely out of their power. A constitutional convention, and here's the wording, I don't have it all memorized, but here's the key words. If 2/3 of the state legislators petition Congress for a convention, the wording is the Congress shall call the convention. It's not up for debate. They can't think about it. The wording is shall. They are required by the Constitution to call that convention. And then again, once the convention is held, amendments proposed, whatever is ratified, becomes part of the Constitution like any of the other amendments. Now, there are folks out there who are terrified of the idea of a constitutional convention. And if you do any research on it, you'll learn very quickly that there are folks out there who fear a convention because they're afraid of where it will go. And it's frankly misinformation. And the most common fear is that a constitutional convention would rescind the Constitution. Well, the fact is, folks, it's just simply not true. And I'm sorry, I'm a big fan of Glenn Beck, but he's even said that, and he's incorrect on that. And I've been trying to get on his show to debate him on exactly that point so he can go educate the rest of the millions of listeners. Because the fact is, the wording in Article 5 is, the purpose of this article is to amend the Constitution. Not rethink it, not rescind it, not throw it away, not replace it, amend. And that is solely what it is. And any action to do any more than that, there's a word for that, it's called treason. And we're not going to stand by and let that happen. I've thrown a lot of stats and figures out there at you. I would like to ask you to please visit our website. We are at www.citizens-first. I've got a few of the business cards out here. Some of you may have picked those up. The dash is important. And when you type the word in, and do not do a Google search, because if you just type in Citizens First, you'll get about 1,000 banks. I don't know what page we're on, but it's probably about page 500, so make sure you go in there. On the website, you will find links to all your federal legislative offices. You'll find links to all your state legislative offices. You'll find Article 5, big surprise. You'll find some of the founding documents, and specifically the Federalist Paper number 85, where Alexander Hamilton breaks out the reason and the intent behind Article 5. So with that, I'd like to thank the organization for inviting me today. Thank you for your attention. May God bless you, and may God bless America.
Thanks, Larry.